Welcome to this new how-to. In this how-to we're gonna look at the Cub Crafter X Cub airplane. And what we're gonna do specifically is look at the autopilot. So we're currently located at Luxembourg Airport. We already got permission to, I would say, depart in the west direction. But we're gonna take some, I would say, preparations to use the autopilot. So as you can see, the autopilot is centered in this area, right? So let me zoom in a bit. So you will see the heading button, which allows us to set a specific heading. We have got the approach one to use during approaches. The navigation one to use the navigation mode, right? To, for example, use the GPS. The main switch to switch on the autopilot. The flight director to switch on the flight director, right? To make, let's say, a certain climb. The level mode, which can be used for leveling off or attending a certain level, then we've got the vertical speed up and down, which can be enabled by using the this button, the VS button, and then we've got the altitude hold button, which we can use to set specific altitude. Besides that, we've got the VMV mode and the IS mode. It says here, okay, turn on the flight level change mode, and the flight level change mode is sometimes also referred as the IS mode. And VMV mode is if you're programming a flight plan which contains altitudes, it will try to, I would say, keep those altitudes, right? It will automatically increase the altitude or decrease the altitude. So before taking off, we're gonna set an altitude because it's the first thing we want to use for the autopilot, and we can do that by using this button. And you can see that if we're changing this button, this value here will directly start to change. So let's set it to 2500 feet, which is a nice one. And other than that, we will just leave it for now as the default. So let's taxi to the runway. And you can see there are some buses, so we need to be a little bit careful, of course. And also some other aircrafts in the neighborhood. Gonna slowly taxi to it. One of the difficult things with this aircraft is that you sometimes can't hardly see the runway. If that's an issue for you, you can always decide to use the external view, right? If you want to trick it a bit. There are some nice views, like also below the aircraft. But of course, if you want to make it more realistic, then go inside the aircraft. So we're slowly touring over the runway, right? It's half 500 miles or even 400 now already miles are driving to it. Before we're at the start of the runway. That's runway 24 of Luxembourg Airport. Keep in mind I'm using the modified Luxembourg Airport, so not the default one. I recorded a video earlier today which reviews of, say, Luxembourg City. That's also an interesting one. But I will make sure that the Luxembourg City or Luxembourg Airport and City download links are also in the video description here, so you can try them if you, of course, want to try them. So let's decrease speed a bit, because we're almost there, as you can see. So we're gonna turn, and then we're gonna request permission to take off.
Luxembourg Tower, Cub Crafter Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra ready for west departure at runway 24. Cub Crafter Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra altimeter 29.9.2.270 at 3.
So we're gonna. Okay. Oh, so we got approval. So we drop the flaps a bit, and in addition to that, there's nothing needed for now. Of course, you can switch on the flight director already, right? So that's what we're gonna do once we're at the runway. So here we are. Gonna set the parking brake so we can perform some final checks. So as you can see, the RPM has been set to max, fuel mixture has been set to rich. We can adjust that once we're airborne. So we're gonna switch on the flight director mode. If you do that, you can see that a small arrow will be displayed there. But in addition to that, you will see, let me switch it off again, that also some new text is here. So it's in rolling mode and it's in the pitch, so it will, I would say, start to make a climb. And we can decide how big the climb is, either by manually pulling back the stick and then switching on the flight level change mode, or we can use the vertical speed mode to change the climb rate or descent rate. So everything is ready, all the lights are on, everything is okay. Look from the right side. So let's increase the throttle. We move the parking brake, of course, else we are not moving a lot. And then steer a little bit back to the right. And then we're airborne, right? So we're airborne now. We've just taken off from runway 24. So we're climbing. So keep in mind that I would say Luxembourg is a little bit elevated, so we need to climb a little bit more. And on the right side, you can already see the city center. So once you're comfortable, right? Once you're at, I would say, a nice altitude, you can. We're gonna acknowledge it.
Luxembourg Tower, Cub Crafter Alpha Sierra X-ray.
You can switch on the autopilot. And you can do that by simply pressing the AP option. So once you've done that, you will see that the option here, AP, is also illuminated. So it will tell you, hey, I switched on the autopilot. Now if you want to use the flight control mode, or flight level change mode, sorry, you can press this button here. And that will try, in this case, to maintain a speed of 82 knots, but will climb to 2500. As soon as we're there, which is pretty soon, you will see that this option changes again, and it will make sure that it's, I would say, keeping that specific altitude, right? So once we're at that altitude, there are first a few things which we need to do, because you can see that currently the RPM is not really happy, right? So we can decrease speed, of course, which will help a bit. But you will see that if as soon as you throttle back, it will soon go back to the high RPM state. So to prevent that, I would say, drifting out of course, what we're gonna do is we're gonna align the heading. We can do this by pressing the button, which will sync it, and then switch on the heading mode. So it will now fly, I would say, straight to this specific heading. And you can see that it also changed the mode here to heading, and you can change the heading by using this button. And as you can see, currently the blue arrow has been set to 233 degrees, which also means that we're keeping that heading, right? But let's see how we can get off those red numbers. That's where the propeller control comes in, and in addition to that, you can use the mixture control, right? You can also use them in combination. So for example, you can decrease the mixture control a bit. You will see that the RPM temporarily drops, but if you really want to decrease, you need to decrease the propeller RPM control, because that will result in that the RPM is decreasing. These two are critical to use if you want to, I would say, fly as optimal as possible, because if you don't do it, it will, I would say, continuously use the maximum view which there is, right? You can even switch it back further to 50, That's all fine. For this button you need to be a bit careful, because if you're pulling it back too much, it will switch off the engine. It will simply cut the fuel.
Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra frequency change.
So now we're here, we're flying a nice altitude. Let's have a close look at the other autopilot functionalities. One of them we discussed was the heading, right? So for example, if we want to make a turn back to the airport, so we're gonna first fly a little bit to the south, we're gonna use this button. So we're gonna say, okay, let's change our heading to 180. And as you can see already, the aircraft directly starts to turn, right? Now we're at 180, so let's go back inside, or actually we're a little bit further, and then it will continue to fly in that specific direction. That's cool, right? So you can use the heading button to manipulate the direction in which the aircraft is going. So the second one is that you of course can use the altitude. So let's set the altitude to 3000. What you will see now is that it doesn't do anything. To do that, there are two options, I would say, to climb. The first one is to use the flight level change mode, but the other one is the vertical speed mode. So if we press the vertical speed mode, you will see that it directly changed to VS and the Alt Select mode. So now we need to ensure that we're climbing, and you can see that both here and here the climb rate is not sufficient enough. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna increase the climb rate to 500 feet per minute. And as soon as we did that, you can see that it starts to climb. Keep an eye, of course, on the let's say speed, because it doesn't take into account the speed. It will simply start to climb, and it will continue to climb until you're in a stall, and then it of course will drop the airplane. So it could be that, I would say, you need to increase throttling a bit, increase the RPMs a bit to make sure that you're climbing while not losing too much speed. So while it's climbing, you can see that we're coming very close to the 3000 feet, and as soon as we hit there, or we're almost there, then it will change again to the altitude mode, and it will level off at 3000 feet. Nice, isn't it? So that's cool. Now the other option, and the other option is the nav option, right? The nav option can be used to use the GPS information configured in your flight plan. So we're gonna trick a bit. We're gonna use the nearest button, and then we're gonna say, hey, we want to the nearest is the let me see, where's the nearest VOR? That's Luxembourg. So let's go to it and then say direct to, and then say activate. If we now go to our flight plan, and we can do that by pressing the menu button, back, then go to the FPL active flight plan, you will see that it, actually you should have seen that the flight plan has been added here. You can already see that the map has been updated, right? If we open the VFR map, you also see that it has been updated. For some reason it didn't add it here to the flight plan, so let's hit done. Go to the active flight plan, and then do it again, and then say activate. We can do it differently. Let's do it nearest VOR Luxembourg, insert in flight plan, insert event. That's the way. So now it has added it into the flight plan, as you can see. That's cool. So to use that option, or to use that navigation beacon, what you need to do is you need to switch to the nav option. So let's try that and let's see what happens. You currently see that it tries now to go into the direction of the VOR which we configured, right? It starts to turn. So that's cool, right? It starts to turn, and once it's, I would say, correctly aligned, it will fly its direction normally.
Cleared for takeoff runway.
So let's see.
24 Lux Air 267.
Because it looks like that it picked up the localizer, as you can see, so that's not what we want. We can't change much here, to be honest, so let me see why it's not working as we expected it to do.
785, hold short, runway 24.
And that's because the localizer was set to localizer 1. So now we set it to GPS, and hopefully it will pick it up.
Hold short runway 24 Lux Air 785.
So we're gonna activate the nav option again. And see if we've got a little bit more luck in this case. I don't think we have, to be honest, because it's not turning again, right? You can sometimes see that the autopilot doesn't do what you really want it to do, and that sometimes is a bit frustrating, right? So let's see if we can get it working. It's kind of weird because it shows here correctly. So what we're gonna do is a manual adjustment, and to do that manual adjustment we're gonna use the heading option to manually set the navigation course.
Lux Air 785, line up and wait.
And we know that the direction is here, so once we've done that we can switch back to the heading mode again, and as you can see the aircraft will start to turn again. So let's hide this one. In the meantime we're gonna tune into approach, and what to do that a little bit better, we're gonna ask for flight following, because then we can use ILS, for example.
Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra is type Cub Crafter CC 19 4 miles east of Lima Foxtrot 08 3000 feet. Request flight following. Cub Crafter Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra Luxembourg approach. Squawk 671 tree.
So I'm gonna acknowledge the squawk code.
Squawk 671 tree Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra. Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra radar contact 4 miles northeast of Lima Foxtrot 08 3000 feet. Altimeter 29.92.
Oh, that's fine.
Roger, Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask for permission to land on Luxemburg Airport. I'm gonna contact the tower. We're gonna go for full stop.
Luxembourg Tower Cub Crafter's Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra is 10 miles southwest 3000 feet with Quebec to land. Cub Crafter's Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra Luxembourg Tower. Altimeter 29.9 21270 at tree. Enter left downwind runway 24. Fly left downwind runway 24.
The reason they're assigning this one is because we're not. Let me do it a different way. I was hoping to get an ILS, but we can still use it.
Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra, your cancellation is received.
So we're gonna tune into approach.
Contact Brussels Center on 125.0. Luxembourg approach Cub Crafter's Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra is type Cub Crafter CC 19 6 miles northeast of Lima Foxtrot 08 3000 feet. Request flight following. Cub Crafter's Alpha Sierra X-ray Golf Sierra Luxembourg approach. Squawk 1455.
1455.
Squawk 1455, Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra radar contact 7 miles northeast of Lima Foxtrot 08, 3,000 feet. Altimeter 29.902. Roger, Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra.
Can see the aircraft starting to turn again.
Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra 7 miles northeast of Lima Foxtrot 08. Request IFR to Luxembourg, ready to copy. Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra is cleared to Luxembourg Airport as filed. Squawk 1455. Cub Crafters
I acknowledge that.
Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra cleared to Luxembourg Airport as filed. Squawk 1455. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra read back correct.
Oh, we need to climb crazy high.
Altimeter 29.902, turn right heading 240, resume on
In that case, we probably want to adjust it.
Turn right heading 240, resume on navigation climb and maintain 10,000 feet. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra, you are 10 miles southwest. Keep speed not above 250 knots. Expect 4 DME runway 24 approach via Vavid transition. Clear to Vavid.
So let's see if we can also.
Please stand by Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra, roger.
I want to use ILS. In this case, it's really crazy busy at the airport, as you can see, or as you can hear.
Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra would like ILS runway 24 approach Vavid transition. Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra, you are 11 miles southwest. Keep speed not above 250 knots. Expect ILS runway 24 approach via Vavid transition. Clear to Vavid.
I'm gonna acknowledge that.
Not above 250 knots. Expect ILS runway 24 approach via Vavid transition. Clear to
Oh.
Vavid Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra.
What was it? This was. Oh, come on.
Descend and maintain 4,000 feet. Keep speed not above 250 knots. Expect VOR DME runway 24 approach via X-Coast transition. Clear to X-Coast Luxembourg 6542.
So we now changed the, or added the ILS approach, right? So what we did is we used the proc button, and in the proc button you can find the procedures, and there you can define the approach. So in our case, we were assigned ILS 24 and then transition VAVOD, right? And we need to maintain 4,000. So let's also adjust that. So we're gonna adjust it back to 4,000 feet. Oh, not too much.
Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra, please expedite your climb 10,000 feet.
And then we're gonna press the flight control mode again to ensure that we're climbing. In some cases, the flight level change mode, not the flight level control mode, doesn't work that nice. In that case, simply use the vertical speed mode to climb. Also is an easy option. Don't forget to, let's say, switch on the or push forward the RPM control if you're climbing, because else you will not climb a lot. I'm gonna change to the map. In addition to that, we're gonna look at the map here. You can see that it requires the map to be updated because, as you can see, here's VAVOD. So we're actually, I would say, skipping a part of the tour. We're flying directly here, and because we're already at Lima X-Ray 0666, sorry, and then we're gonna fly to Lima X-Ray 242, and then we're gonna go inbound on the runway number 24. So we're not gonna adjust or use the approach mode yet. That's what we're gonna do, but we first need to, I would say, wait a bit until we're, I would say, straight in front of runway number 24. At least that's how I do it normally. So I think we discussed most buttons except the turn level mode on. That's something we didn't discuss yet. So we can't use it really in this flight, if I'm correct. But let me double check that. If there's an opportunity to do it. So the level mode is to establish a 0 FPM vertical reference and 0 bank angle lateral reference. It said here that it can be used to stabilize the altitude and the heading if in some cases it's, I would say, not correctly working, and then you can use this button. Now we need to climb to 10,000 feet again. Sometimes those guys from ATC really don't know what they want you to do. So we're gonna go to 10,000 feet. Gonna hit the vertical speed mode again, and then we're gonna climb with 500 feet per minute while on our way to Lima X-ray 242. You can also see it here, right? You don't need to have the VFR one open. You can simply scroll here, or you can zoom in or out here, and then you can also center on the airplane by hitting the airplane button again. So we're flying over nice Luxembourg, so let's see where we are. Say a little bit far off the airport, also a little bit far off the city itself, if I'm correct. So let me double check that. Yes, we're not above the city yet. We will fly by the city in a few minutes. In the meantime, you can see that we forgot to, I would say, pull in the flaps. Now we need to go 8,000 again. So we're gonna do that.
Climb and maintain 8,000 feet. Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra. Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra. Keep speed not above 220 knots.
So we're gonna also acknowledge that.
Keep speed not above
Shouldn't be an issue.
knots.
We're
Cub
flying
Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra.
83. There's the city on our right side, as you can see. There's the Adolfo Bridge. So there's the city of Luxembourg. And that's also where the airport is pretty close to. So we will climb. You will see that the aircraft will start to turn again pretty soon. As you can see here, it's using the GPS, which is correct, because that's the correct way of using it. It should use the GPS localizer, right? We're gonna use it, but only during the landing phase. And in the bottom corner here, you can already see the airport popping up. You can see that the autopilot makes some corrections. And now it simply is a matter of, I would say, continuing our flight. Let's say resetting the flaps a bit to make a little bit more speed. And you can see that the RPMs are really high, so we can reduce that a bit. because it's not always that good to stay in a longer, I would say, high RPM mode. It's not that good for the engine eventually. We're still climbing almost at 6,000 feet. Can see some other point of interest, and also there we can see some lights from the airport popping up. You can see some red and green lights. Might be a little bit hard to see, it's very far away, but we're coming close. And that's also expected, right? If I open the VFR map, we're now flying here. We need to go to Lima X-ray 242 and then I would say make some turns, and then we're in front of the runway already. So probably the AHC will tell us somewhere that we also need to descend again. They will normally correct you, and that's to ensure that you're capturing the glide scope, because that's used for ILS, as you might know. In the meantime, let's enjoy the nice scenery. And the nice aircraft. Now here you can see one of the other aircrafts in the final approach stage. Here you can see another aircraft on the runway, or waiting to say drive on the runway. Of course it can't do it because this one is landing. And there's also some other aircraft, so it's a busy airport today. In the meantime, we're almost at 7,000 feet. And the funny thing is that you probably will see once we're at 8,000, it will start asking us to descend again to a lower altitude. One of the other things interesting, right? If you want to switch off the autopilot, you can simply press this button that will deactivate it. In some cases you need to make, I would say, huge corrections, which you can't do with the autopilot. In that case, simply switch it off, make the correction, and then switch it on if, I would say, applicable. I had some scenarios where it simply didn't do what I wanted to do. And if I wouldn't switch it off, it would simply crash the aircraft. And that's something, of course, you want to prevent. Like the heading button, you can also use the or press the altitude button to synchronize with the specific altitude. So, for example, if I'm flying and the autopilot is not switched on, I can press this button and it will set the altitude automatically to the altitude I'm currently flying. So, if I would do it right now, it would change this value to 7200 instead of 8,000, right? So we're coming closer and closer to our next waypoint. It's, of course, I would say, it's not you can't compare this aircraft with an airliner, right? So it takes a little bit longer to fly to the waypoint. ETA, you can see it here, right? That's good. But the ETA is to the Lux waypoint, which is not the one we're gonna fly to, because we're gonna fly to LX 242. You can see the altitude starting to blimp. That will mean it will change to the altitude mode. and once we're there it will level off, and we can reduce the RPM further if we want. If you want to do it with the keyboard, you need to press the Control and then Function 2 key to decrease, Function 3 key to increase the RPM control. So just for your awareness. So let's have a look at the flight plan. So we're at it's 28 miles in total, and then it's our short turns. So this is where you see is this is why we need to flight 8000. So it will instruct us after Lima X-ray 242 to decrease to 3000, because that's the next one, as you can see. And then eventually the runway is at 1263 feet. So it's an elevated runway. It's not, I would say, on the zero level. So that's good. The carbon heat and the carburetor heat, right? It's not needed. It's not that cold. You can see it here. It's a little bit cold. It's -1. And we'll soon start to turn, right? Because we're almost at Lima X-ray 242. I can also show it on the bigger screen in the VFR map.
Cub Crafter X-ray Golf Sierra descend and maintain 3000.
Here it is. So again, to decrease the altitude, we're gonna use this button, and we're gonna do it a little bit like this, because then we can also have a look at this one. So we're gonna acknowledge it.
Descend and maintain 3000 feet. Cub Crafter's X-ray Golf Sierra.
And then we're gonna use either the flight control mode or flight level change mode. Always saying flight level control mode. If it doesn't pick it up, we're gonna use the VS mode. So we can do that one. I'm gonna descend with 500 feet per minute. Maybe a little bit more. Oh, don't forget to take the throttle a little bit back to avoid that you're going in overspeed. And of course, if you want to avoid that, you can also drop the flaps a bit as preparation for the landing. And keep an eye on that speed, because if you're going too fast, it's not good. Because we need to descend a lot, right? We need to descend to 3000 from 8000. And as you can see, this part goes really quick, while the initial part was, I would say, pretty long. This part goes quick, and then we're already here, and there we need to be on the correct altitude to ensure that we can, I would say, capture the glide scope correctly, and to use the magic approach button or approach mode, which is part of the autopilot. So we're passing 7000. As you can see, the autopilot does everything for us, right? It's, I would say, kind of relaxed for us. But always keep an eye, right? You're the pilot, if you need to make corrections, do it yourself. Because in some cases the autopilot doesn't do what you want it to do. Could be multiple reasons for that.
Cub Crafter X Golf Sierra, you are 12 miles northeast of Luxembourg.
Okay.
Contact Luxembourg Tower on 118.105 when inbound. Tower on 118.105 Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra. Luxembourg Tower Cub Crafters Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra 12 miles northeast inbound ILS runway 24 approach.
You can see it starts to turn soon.
Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra Luxembourg Tower. Altimeter 29.9 2 and 269 at 3. Cleared ILS runway 24 approach.
Gonna acknowledge that.
Cleared ILS runway 24 approach Cub Crafters X-Ray Golf Sierra.
And here comes an interesting thing, right? You can see that it has changed something. Because it has switched back to the localizer mode. And that sometimes is crap, because you can see that the aircraft doesn't turn. So I would say to prevent that's happening, we need to fix it, of course, because this is not what we want. And we can press the option here, always forgetting it. Can you use the GPS, and then hopefully it will pick it up. If it doesn't pick it up like it does now, we need to take the manual intervention, right? So we need to manually adjust this piece. So we're gonna say, hey, we want to switch off the autopilot for now. Then we're gonna first make the correction. You can see that also the red icon starts to blimp, which means that the autopilot is switched off. And the reason we're doing this is because it switched to localizer mode. Localizer mode is not bad, because that is eventually what we need. But for now it's not good, because if you're using the localizer mode, it will not use the I would say the navigation mode will not work correctly. So we need to make an adjustment, and I will show it on the bigger map, because you can see that we're kind of diverted a bit from our flight plan. We're gonna zoom into the flight plan a little bit further. And once we're at the same line again, what we will do is we will move to the, we can already do that, localizer 1. That's good. And now I want to go back to the map. Come on. Map. Because I want to keep an eye on it. Of course, I could have also opened the map by pressing the V from Victor. And the most important thing is, as you know with ILS, is that you're centering the line as much as possible, which is almost the case. So we're gonna make a turn to the left a bit. Because else we're flying too far, of course. Too far to the right is also not good. You can also already see the runway, and what we're now gonna do is we're gonna switch on the approach mode and then switch on the autopilot. And if everything goes okay, the autopilot should now handle it correctly. That depends a bit, because as you can see, the GS is not, let's say, green yet, which means it didn't intercept the glide scope yet. That's probably because we're a little bit too high. It's not an issue, it will eventually capture it, hopefully. Because this green dot, which you can see here, needs to be in the center, right? Then you're at the glide scope. So we're gonna help the aircraft a bit and say, okay, hey, we want to go a little bit faster. decreasing the altitude, and what you will see is that normally the this button will, this green dot will come to the center, and hopefully eventually it will capture the glide scope. If it doesn't work, excuse me for waiting, or then we were simply too high and then it didn't capture the glide scope correctly, and that in that case it will, the approach mode won't work that well. It really needs to have, I'd say, the letters need to be green, and if it's not green then it doesn't work. So we're gonna push the aircraft a little bit further down. Come on. It's always a nightmare. If it doesn't work, it's always a nightmare, as you can see.
Luxembourg ground Luxair 553 requesting pushback.
Let me see.
Cub Crafter X Cub Sierra 269er at tree. Cleared to land runway 24.
So we're cleared to land. So we're gonna acknowledge it. In the meantime, we're gonna try to decrease the altitude a bit.
General aviation parking by taxiway Charlie Alpha Kilo 1 Air Portugal 6904. Cub Crafter X-ray Golf Sierra, did you hear my last transmission?
Yes, we heard you loud and clear. You can see that it's a nightmare. It didn't capture the glide scope. It also didn't capture the I'd say the the glide scope. So that's nightmare, because if it doesn't capture the glide scope, it does, I would say the autopilot doesn't do its work, right? So in those situations like this, then you really need to switch off the autopilot and do it manually, because it won't work. Of course, the best way in this situation would be to, I would say, cancel the flight or cancel the landing, and then make sure that you do a turn around and try it again. That would be the ideal way. As you can see, we're now correct, so let me try to see if we can switch on the autopilot again. No, let's not do it. You can see that it already doesn't work well. In some cases, it could also be the ILS beacon for the airport not being correctly in Flight Simulator. That's also what some people are reporting for some of the airports. I'm not sure if that's also the case, to be honest, for Luxembourg Airport, but it could be. If that's the case, I would say automatically using the approach mode will not work. So again, sorry for that it didn't work. I was hoping that it would work. Probably need to record a new video for that last part on a different airport. In the meantime, I'm trying to, let's say, make some corrections because of the autopilot. It pushed the aircraft a little bit too much to the right side, as you can see. And we of course want to land on the runway itself. Luckily, the aircraft is, I would say, pretty small compared to the runway.
Roger, Luxair 553.
A little bit of bumpy landing, but hey, we're there. So this is also where this how-to ends, right? In this how-to we looked at the several options of the autopilot. Unfortunately, we couldn't use the approach mode, which didn't work that well on this airport. Probably will record a new one for that specific piece. Hope you liked this video. If you liked it, then consider to use the like button. If you've got questions or comments, then feel free to add them below the video. And if you want to stay up to date about new videos I'm posting, then consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.